We're recording this at an interesting time in history when we have for years used, 5 different terms and those are really diversity and inclusion and equity and equality. And then really in the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years, more belonging. Those are the 5 words. But right now, all of these, not all, but yeah, pretty much all of these words are really divisive. But what I love about what you're doing in this podcast episode is let's look at that, but then let's connect it with strengths.
Hi, and welcome to the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner of Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern of Talent Teams Consulting. This season, we're welcoming fellow coaches back to the show to explore how people can move beyond naming and claiming their talents and start to aim their talents. We're calling this season, Strengths Applied.
And our topic today is equity. While this is a very big topic, we are mostly focused on equity within the workplace. We are joined today by Dr. Susan Madsen. She is a Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership, Director of Utah Women in Leadership Project in the John M. Huntsman School of Business Extension at Utah State University. Susan's top 5 are achiever, strategic, activator, learner, and responsibility. Susan, you are in good company because Chad and I together share your top 5.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm really we're really excited to have you. Thank you so much for coming on.
Oh, it's great to be here with both of you.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us. Jen introduced you to me, and I was like, oh, we definitely have to have her on.
Oh.
So I'm so thankful you were able to make the time and join us for our little podcast here.
Well, I do a lot of speaking every week, lots and lots of podcasts, but I don't really I do some in the strength space, but most of my work is not the Gallup strengths and so forth. So I'm really, looking forward to talking about that because I've been a Gallup strengths coach for lots and lots of years myself.
Nice. Nice. So I want to start us off just by sort of level setting a few things for our audience, and I'm sure Dr. Madsen is going to be able to help us with digging into this a little bit further. But one of the first things that Jen and I definitely want to do is offer some clarity around the difference between equity and equality. We've done this sort of explanation in some of our other episodes. In season 1, we talked about empathy and sort of the empathy definition based from Gallup versus, Merriam-Webster's dictionary definition of empathy. So as we level set this episode, I wanted to do the same sort of thing, differentiate between equity and equality. So equality means everybody gets the same thing. You treat everybody the exact same. In strengths language, the first place I went to was, this is probably most associated with the theme of consistency, though not always. But I just thought it was a nice sort of tie into strengths. Versus equity, which means everyone gets what they need to succeed, even if that means that you're doing different things for different people. You're recognizing that the needs may vary. And so the theme, bring this a little strengths into this, probably more associates with maybe an individualization theme, where you're really giving each person what they need as you try and bring everybody up to kind of allowing everybody to succeed. So I just first want to say that one of the other big reasons we're having Dr. Madsen on is that based on some research I found, 85% of organizations see room for improvement in how well the organizations measure the success of their workplace equity initiatives. So there's a lot to talk about. Jen's already sort of zoned us in a little bit on the workplace, but this is a big topic, a lot of conversations. Jen's told me that Dr. Madsen has plenty of data that's going to satisfy my analytical, but I want to start us off with one. So, Jen, I know this topic is important to you. Is there something you want to add in terms of why we're talking about this?
Yeah, sure. I think we were excited originally to tackle this topic of equity because when workers feel that their workplaces are equitable, they see their potential. They feel like they can speak up, they're more likely to stay at their workplace. With equity, employees see themselves in a future in their company. But that inequity that happens, it triggers all these feelings of injustice, that feeling that some people have an unfair advantage that helps them get ahead. That feeling can make it really hard for workers to feel like they even have a chance for promotions, for pay increases, for even just advancement within the company. And I think it also makes it more likely that they're going to look for somewhere else to work. So when we talk about that 80% of businesses feel like they could probably do a better job at this, or right, that was the stat, Chad. I think this is where it's coming from, and I know personally many people who have left a job because they felt like they hit that ceiling and just no matter what they did, they couldn't move forward. So I'm really hoping that our listeners can take away from this conversation that there is so much that we need to be doing our part in breaking down those barriers that can cause these inequities. And I think one of the best ways we can do that is focusing on our talents. Dr. Madsen, I'm so curious if you have any stats you'd like to share with us. I know I'm kind of like throwing that out open-ended, but every time I've seen you or heard you speak, you have stats to share, and I would love if you would share some.
Well,
with us.
I don't necessarily have stats, but I have a couple comments on this whole. I mean, we're recording this at an interesting time in history when we have for years used 5 different terms, and those are really diversity and inclusion and equity and equality, and then really in the last maybe 3, 4, 5 years more belonging. Those are the 5 words. But right now, all of these, not all, but yeah, pretty much all of these words are really divisive. And so even at my university, you can't say in a sentence, you can't write with the 3 words together. You can't have those. And so it's really interesting how words become, so political when you really, and equity is something that has been more loaded. But when you look at the definition that Chad gave, it really is not a loaded word. It shouldn't be. I mean, equality is a little softer for some people, but equality just means everybody's getting the same, whether they need it or not, right? They just get the same stuff. And when I use certain examples, people are like, well, that doesn't make sense to give people that already have help, like students in high school, give them, if they have parents at home, that sure, meet with them, have the counselors meet with them, but it doesn't make sense to give them a whole bunch of the same effort that people that don't even have parents that speak English, that actually have never been to college. It makes sense, but it has just become so loaded. And so I love your focus, though, when you, and equity, again, just to confirm that, is really around this fairness and so forth. But if people don't need things, then they don't need those. Let's just lift to make sure everybody in society, we all benefit, right?
Yes.
When more people are educated, crime goes down for society. So many other kinds of things like that. So just it's just interesting in terms of stats. They're changing every day in 2015 on these issues, but they're just so loaded right now. But what I love about what you're doing in this podcast episode is let's look at that, but then let's connect it with strengths. And so I do love that connection. And I love talking about strengths because it's really an optimistic space to go. Instead of looking for, and you're feeling this in the national and in different states, looking for what's wrong all the time. And every time you turn on the news, all conversations, we're looking at what's wrong. This looks at the opportunities for growth, the opportunities for really being able to contribute, learn, grow, and contribute in the best way possible in your home, in your community, in your workplace, and beyond.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Susan. We're so glad to have you on for this. I knew you would come with lots of wealth of knowledge and also that passion that I was hoping for. So I want to start us off with a question and asking you about your personal experience with equity. Can you share some?
Absolutely. So everything I do probably, not every minute of every day, but pretty much my whole life is in that zone because I am a women's leadership scholar. And I've been in the space of helping lift women develop, but you can't ignore the inequities, inequalities when you're looking at, especially in the workforce, but it goes into every situation. Because what we know, I mean, the data, I have books back here, right, that I published that have chapters. Every chapter, all these, thousands of studies, maybe tens of thousands of studies. It is clear that in most workplaces, it's just not equitable, and there's not equality, and a lot of it still is what we call hostile when we get into using the term sexism, but a lot is benevolent sexism and just, we don't understand our biases. And that's an interesting thing too, because unconscious bias training is like outlawed in some places now. And I'm like, I just need to change my title, right, to becoming a better human being, to becoming less judgmental, because I do mine in church settings and interactive and all kinds of things. There's nothing scary about it. There's nothing scary at all about it. So yeah, my life is and the work I do, even in the classroom, I would say when I teach leadership, there's always that inclusion piece, right? But my writing, everything, especially in my career right now, in my 60s, is I'm like, I'm not doing other stuff. I'm going to hone right into my strengths and use that for not just my paid work, but my call. And I publish on women leadership and calling, and I'm religious and spiritual, and so my call, I do my work because I'm called, is from God. Yet I published on people without religion, people without spirituality. They can feel called too. So it's really interesting when you go through life and get to be different ages, how you yearn in many ways to utilize your strengths and your natural gifts and your talents in ways that can really help and lift other people uniquely, the way that we're built, each of us, our head, heart, and our hands.
Susan, what I find so interesting about what you just said is it ties into so many of the sort of the reason I wanted to have this conversation, sort of my own experiences. I mean, I fully own the fact that I am a middle-aged, middle-class white individual.
White guy.
I'm the stereotypical white guy, right? And coming from what I actually just recently learned this term a couple months ago is I come from a historically advantaged population, right? I'm educated, college educated. I've got a master's. I am the stereotypical white guy, and I work in a middle class environment. And yet, the spiritual side that you're talking about, belief in God. I was raised Episcopalian. I celebrate with my my wife's Roman Catholic background as well, and part of the reason that I think that this is this topic in particular is so important is that we're all called to be children of God, that we are all valuable. They were made in His image. And we're not going to get super religious on this episode, I don't think. But I do think that that's part of the reason why I find this conversation so engaging, because then I look at actions of like what Germ did last year, right? They yanked the equity part right out of their sort of top line call to action, right, around what was DE&I, and that to me just doesn't sit right. And so that's what, when I mentioned topics that we want to have discussed this season with Jen, I was like, this has got to be one of them, because this cannot stand. I also think you talk about how we support people as they grow up. I've got two young boys. They each need different things, even in the home life.
Yes.
Like, right, I've got one of my sons, great kid. Both of them are great kids. One of them's need a little bit more help with his reading. The other one excels at math, and yet my younger one who needs help with the reading is a phenomenal math student. Right?
Yeah.
I've got to find the right balance of
Yeah.
educational support for them, because I won't want both of them to be high performing students and be able to enjoy life and be knowledgeable about the world. But I've got to get them there in two very different
Very
ways.
different way.
And that doesn't take anything away from the support that I'm giving to my older son, just because he didn't need the reading help as much. That doesn't take anything away from him. It just means I'm looking at him through a different lens and providing him individualized support. And so I really loved a lot of things that you said there.
So I wanted to jump in though and give you just a little piece of an academic model that's actually in my last book, 2024. And it is a calling model. And it comes from a Christian background at Azusa Pacific, some of the people there. But what's so interesting about our conversation today is when you look at calling, it's kind of a circle, this model of calling in workplace or home or anything. At the very, very center of it is your unique giftedness. Mm-hmm. And so when I talk about this, I say if you're looking we need women, what the research has found is if women want to feel that deeper purpose and calling, about 30 to 40% than men do. We just want purpose in everything as women. But to find that calling and purpose, the key is understanding first our strengths, our talents, how our brain works, that uniqueness about who we are, and then we take that over to that calling, that purpose. That could be in the workplace, that could be in any setting, but that connection, I think, is really powerful for our conversation on strengths.
Yeah. Jen, I can see you nodding along. I immediately thought of your belief in terms of calling and belief. So I'm curious, like, what's been your experience with this type of equity? And I know we're going to get into themes here in a little bit, but I'm sure with your strong belief, you can't help but engage with this.
Oh, yes. And as soon as Susan used the word yearning, as she talks about getting older, and as we get older, that yearning starts to grow in us. And I will say, I can notice it even from a young age. So personally, I can think back to knowing and feeling inequities even when I was really young. I remember all my boy cousins had the most fun toys. Right? They had RC cars, they had racetracks, they had tools that they could actually break things. They had Legos where they could build things. And my toys were kitchen sets and coloring books and a dollhouse and of course Barbies. And don't get me wrong. I love my toys. There was nothing wrong with those, but they were nowhere near as fun as my cousin's toys. And I don't really mean to pick on my dad, but I'm gonna a little bit here. I asked for an RC car. I remember distinctly asking him for an RC car, and he told me, quote, "That's a boy's toy."
Yeah.
And I doubt he even remembers telling me that, but it has stuck with me my entire life. And anytime that I saw someone having something that really was for another group and it somehow excluded me, I had a real problem with that. And so for the longest time, as things happened, my brothers were born years and years later, and I watched them get all the toys that I had wanted. I watched them get the Nintendo, not me. I'm the one who asked for it. It was one of those things that, as I continued to get old, and I was old enough to get the things I wanted for myself, I regularly would go for those things that were not necessarily meant for me. And this includes my profession. I went into architecture. I wanted to be in construction management, and oh my goodness, the barriers put up when I wanted to go there. So I was like, okay, well, fine, I'll go to architecture. That's close. I was one of two girls who graduated in my class, but what I think it meant with us is we noticed we needed to work harder We had to work longer. We had to be better in order to get similar marks as our counterparts. And that's
aligned with all the research, by the way.
And
women
still,
like,
even
the latest research still, there's some changes, a bit more, in STEM areas, and those. But I'll tell you that particularly in the state of Utah, and there's other states that have done this, they passed legislation that has resulted in our women's resource centers on all of our campus being shut down, all of our public campuses, and now all the women's clubs, like women in engineering, women in architecture, women in like climbing groups for women, they've all been shut down, or they call it, we're just merging. They're being dismantled, or they have. And so that is, this fight for people that really don't understand the research, they don't understand what equity means. They don't understand what equality, and they think when you lift other people, it's the scarcity mentality that it takes away from them. And so what we're going to see now is a decrease in women in architecture, because women have to have kind of that safe space and support each other. It's interesting that in my religion, there's groups for women and men and then there's things that everybody's together. And that's because women need to be together sometimes and men need to be together sometimes. And then we all need to be together a lot of the time. So I just think it's so fascinating. But what you said in your story is still supported by all the research that we as parents just naturally we can say, we do everything the same. No, we don't. And you can't say everything is equal, when women do this or girls do these kinds of things and men do this or have these kinds of experiences. You can't say everything's equal. It's fascinating, isn't it?
It is. And I'd say I think that trend about the women needing, us girls in college needing to work harder, longer to get, it's still there, and it continued into my workplaces. I worked in lots of places, very male dominated fields. And I will say it was this feeling of always needing to prove I belonged there. Yeah. And I think that was maybe that's maybe the thing that drives my belief and my consistency the most. And I know Chad's going to go into talents now, I'm sure, anyway, but that's where I see those coming out the strongest, is that constant drive. Like, you can't keep me out, and if I have to prove it. But it's also the reason a lot of women tend to burn out, because we're put in these, like, prove it, prove you belong here.
Two elements that's important to throw out. One of them, sometimes I've heard and I've read that they're like, just women need to get more confidence. Women need to do this. Women are the ones feeling like they have to do more. What the research tells us is that could be a piece of it. But the systemic, and that's not a popular word right now, right? But the systems and processes that are in place, and you can see those, especially when you're aware, are just, for the most part, especially in STEM and non-traditional fields for women, they're like the air that people breathe, especially men. They don't notice
used to it. Mm-hmm.
I had a CEO one time that came up a couple years ago and said, we're hiring all these women in tech companies, but they're leaving after a year or two, and I don't get it. And they're not telling me why, and I'm like, describe your culture.
Yep.
Describe how you do competition, your compensation. And its competition is what is more masculine. Describe this, and I'm like, you have a masculine culture. That's why the women can't put their finger on it, but they're like, I don't belong here. And so I've spoken at some engineering things, and men will like, we want women, come. And it's like, there's this layer of unconscious, sometimes conscious, but unconscious that is, they're just invisible to a lot of people.
And I don't think others see it. It is like
women
like
sometimes don't see it.
It's a veil. And I will say I've been one to be in places where they wanted me. I knew I was wanted, yet when I was there, it was like this constant, like, oh, hold on, just, like stay in your corner.
Yeah.
Don't be too loud, that sort of thing.
So they wanted, quote, I'm putting quote marks up.
Yes.
They wanted diversity.
Yes.
They're doing some things that are things that you put in the inclusion category, because inclusion
Sure.
are what organizations do, yet you still didn't belong.
Right.
So you can do diversity, you can do inclusion, but it's a different thing to belong.
Yep.
And so it is, yeah, there's so much research around this, of course.
Yeah. I love that those pieces you just put together, because the sort of equation, it's my analytical brain wants to put things in a sort of an equation, is that you have to have if you want the diversity and you adding inclusion, but you have to have equity part so that you can get to the belonging. So the belonging is sort of on the other side of the equal sign, but you have to have all three. And if you don't have all three, you don't get to the belonging part. So before we move on to to my next question, I did want to just ask a question to sort of expand this a little bit. We've talked a lot about women, and I'm right there with you. I know I'm the guy on the conversation here. But I know that, and I speak living in the second whitest state in the entire U.S. But I'm just wondering, do you have any particular insights on outside of the male-female, but like racial, we talked about systemic, and that's the one thing that I got thinking about. Like, we have our African American history has not exactly been advantageous in that population and in our history, as a history major. And so, understand the systems that were put in place around that. And then you have our immigrant population, which again, we're recording this in the middle of, all of residents and administration's efforts around that population. But as we think about trying to include people and make things equitable, do you have any particular insights?
Well, all of it,
expanding it beyond the male-female that we've been talking about?
Intersectionality was originally come up, that word was originally designed for really women of color. So that's where it really, now we use it for everyone. And so in the work that I do in terms of writing, but also my work in the state of Utah on the Utah Women in Leadership Project, and then 2 years ago, we launched a 7-year movement to really catch us up and move beyond other states called A Bolder Way Forward. And so as we work on health, the pay gap, reducing violence, things in home and family, healthier relationship, all of these kinds of things, we actually have we have a model, but we also have what are called impact teams. And one is, so doing the work on health or pay gap or anything that the women struggle with, if we're not paying attention to race, ethnicity, refugees and immigrants, LGBTQ, we have male allyship. We're doing a lot in that space of male allyship. 50 plus, women that are older, different age groups. If we're not paying attention to those and others, I didn't list them all, disabilities is another team that we have in there. We have 12 different teams that intersect all of our we have 18 areas of focus. This is a systems thinking movement. It's kind of complex, but my point is that if we're not keeping our eye on race, ethnicity, those kinds of things, that they will, as they've had through centuries before, be lost. That's just, But what I know is the experiences of women of color there's a lot of things that are similar. When I get women in the room, for instance, I hosted a group of women this week in my home for an hour and a half, and from the Middle East, from different countries. It's interesting because there's differences, but then there's some similarities too that we just all connect no matter what country. But I know from the research and just hearing hundreds and hundreds of stories from women of color, I didn't used to think this, but now I really understand their experiences are different. And if we make that invisible, then it goes to the status quo. And the status quo is men. Invisible Women is a book. If you haven't read it, oh my gosh, you would like that, Chad. It's all about data. And so
Okay.
it's fascinating.
Really noted.
Everything defaults to the status quo, which is men, white, the various kinds of things. And that's what we just go to. And not just men go to the status quo. We all go, as women go to that status quo. So good question and good thought, because I'm not perfect, but it's taken a lot of work for me to, when things happen in my mind and my mouth, when I verbalize it, say, well, what about women with disabilities? Or what about women who have served their country and are veterans or service women currently? So it's taken work, but it also, Chad, is taken a lot of work for me to truly, and I'm not there, truly understand, and I'm going to say another it's not a popular word either, and that is privilege.
Yeah.
And I see, for instance, this is sometimes people get technical on privilege, but I use it more broadly. So of course I'm white and all, educated in all of these. But I was raised with no sisters and 6 brothers. And I can interact with business leaders who are men, and I can banter them right back at them, and I am not intimidated by men, and I can get along. And I'm like, in the work I'm doing, I think that's a privilege that I had in my upbringing. So it's fascinating. We could get off. We're not talking about too much, but I think we're going there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, let's.
Well, so that was going to be my next question. I wanted to make sure that we were broadening the conversation, because I'm sure that there are other listeners that are coming from diverse backgrounds, and I very much respect the work that you're doing, particularly around women, but know that this topic, touches a lot of different populations.
It does.
About giving everybody, what they need. You talk about veterans and giving them the support they need coming back from whatever experiences they've had, and our different racial cultures here, particularly in the U.S., giving them what they need and the support that's appropriate for them. We were talking about the equity part at the beginning. I do want to move us a little bit into strengths, because that's,
awesome.
Really, all 3 of us are trained in it. I'm just wondering if you could maybe quickly highlight, I don't know, 2 or 3 themes that have helped you either address equity or helped you learn about it, but just maybe quick tie from what strengths have been helpful, and how so.
And you know what? I am in a space where I've created a big movement in Utah, and there's 6,000 people in year 2 involved. There's 270 leaders, all kinds of things. It's pretty much taken everything I have that I've learned from being a mom, from being a worker, from all my, education, to do what I'm doing. And so I actually so my number 1 is achiever. And Jen has been following the work closely. And if I didn't have this restlessness of an achiever, there's no way I would get what I produce with my team more than any other team there is. I think pretty much we just get, so that achiever keeps me going all the time. And that feeds right into the work I'm doing, which is all about equity and equality. And then I'll tell you, if you don't have strategic as an achiever, you can get off. You can just do stuff. And so all day long, all the things I'm doing are, let's get things done. My statement is, let's close the loop on that one. Let's close the loop on that one. But then every day we're shifting priorities, like what's the most important. So that's strategic. And then my number 3 is activator. So a lot of academics are not activators. And so I've got the achiever, strategic, and then I am all about activating and changing things, which you will both remember that the second little line when they describe an activator is that they are often impatient. And so that I am doing that. And then you said too, but let me just finish my last two.
It's fine.
Oh, go
My
ahead.
learner is always, and I'm not my husband is the learner that strengths that Gallup describes, and that is just likes the process of learning whatever. And so when I was raising 4 kids, every time the kids would say, "Why is the sky blue?" I would like, "Go ask your dad." Why is this? Go ask your dad. My learner is narrowed. So I've got the achiever strategic activator. Mine is narrowed and deep. And so, but I'm always like trying to read and find things. And then I don't do the work I do just to do it. If I didn't have the responsibility, which I will tell you is quite heavy on my shoulders, and being a very religious and spiritual person, and being in my 60s now, the whole reason, and I'm going to get a little teary-eyed, that I do the work I do is my responsibility from God, that I believe that I am put here on earth and have had the privileges and the education and the confidence to use my voice because I feel accountable to God for that. So that, and it sucks sometimes, can I just say that, to have that heavy on my shoulders. And so I've had to wrestle with, we always wrestle with who we are, our personalities, our strengths, all of those things, to convince myself that I don't have to give everything. I can also find joy. That's my project for this summer, is to find a little more joy. So my point is, I've been wrestling for decades in this space, but they all really work together. And one interesting thing I'll just mention that I think both of you and your listeners will be interested in, that on Sundays, and I haven't done this for about 6 months, I need to get back to it. So I was raised in a household where my parents had us do journals. So I have diaries and journals, and I kept that up for a lot of years. And so on Sundays, I need to get back to this. Like I said, I have gone back and gone through these journals of when I was in high school, and I'm typing them up and thinking about them. And in college and early marriage, and I'll tell you, you can see achiever, I can see activator, I can see, and so people that say, I don't want to be an achiever, or I don't want to feel responsibility, I'm like, this is you. Mm-hmm. Can't change these things, and they're not negative things. They have that shadow side. We all know our language, right? They have that shadow side, because I'm a workaholic, and I have to watch that because of my achiever. But I'll tell you, it's been profound. And can I just say, some of my entries, when I was on bed rest with my 3rd child, and I was hard on myself, like, I'm not getting enough done, and I was trying to protect
responsibility.
Yeah, I am like, I just feel compassion for my earlier self. Mm-hmm. Anyway, well, I thought you would find that interesting.
Yeah.
If only we knew from the beginning. And I go back to that, like, why didn't I learn this in my 20s so that I, wouldn't have had like such a hard time on myself. And Chad, I'm sure you hear why I love Susan and why I asked her to come. And I think it is not by mistake that I am always talking about the people who feel left behind, the people who feel pushed aside. They are the people who find me. I would say that starts a lot from my consistency. Like I cannot stand, like, it just, if you go back and watch our consistency episode, you can see the in me that I cannot stand when someone has an unfair advantage. I do very much think that everyone needs to be treated the same, but that's this, like, we assume equality, or we assume equity in order to have equality, but we just don't have equity. So I feel like that's where this like keeps
Yeah.
falling apart. Like we can't get there. We can't treat everyone equal if we don't have equity to begin with. And so I think that consistency really gets me. And then of course, like, let's just add fuel to that fire with my belief. I will say that I get on my soapbox a lot about it, and you can hear my belief coming through in almost every time I talk about things that are really important to me. But it's that, like, this is so wrong. This shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
And, I like to, I think it makes me really intolerant sometimes of like what's popular. Oh my goodness. Do I think that's a dirty word?
It is so, it's so interesting to just kind of figure that out. I'm a change agent with all my strengths.
Right.
My lesser strength, we call them lesser strengths.
Yes.
My 34th is harmony. So I am a change agent, and I'm shaking things up all the time. And that's what I have to do. If you're going to change and get violence rates down and shake things up and get things off the status quo, then I'm not so concerned about harmony.
Right.
But I can have harmony. It just takes more work because my neurotransmitters and all of those things that happen to lead us towards the easiest thing. That's what a strength is, right? When you develop those talents, is not in that space. But I can have harmony. I always wished for more harmony with my 4 kids when they were teenagers.
I'm sorry. I just wanted to like land my plane that it was started, and then I got off track. Is that, like, it is not a mistake. It is not a mistake. I was called to Utah. And within a month of being here, was told about Susan and this initiative, A Bolder Way Forward. Like, it is not a mistake. And the more people I meet, the more women I speak to, specifically women I speak to, it like builds that responsibility. Responsibility is number one for me, Susan. I think it's so close most of the time. I don't even know it's there. Like, I don't know that that's what's going on with me.
And responsibility.
Responsibility, achiever, belief, deliberative, activator. So that's where, like, we do share a lot, and restless is absolutely a thing. But I do think, like you said about that calling and that yearning, I do honestly believe I am here for a reason. And when I learned that Utah is like dead last for women's rights and all of the equality things, I was like, why did I move here? And then I'm like, oh, now I see.
That's why. So are you in the Bolder Way Forward already?
I am. I'm the co-lead of the women's young girls and young women.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Thank you for that reminder. That's such an important space. I'm so glad you're working in that space.
Me too.
And you'll bring that that strength understanding to have it be foundational in the work that is over there, because people, I mean, young women right now, I mean, it's a crisis. I mean, 60% in the United States say they're struggling with depression. They're looking at their phones, they're looking at body image, all of these things, and this Gallup strengths brings those internal innate talents that can be developed into strengths. I'm so glad you're there.
Thank you. Yeah, I am too. Chad, I know I don't want to miss you and your talent. So do you want to give us some information? I know you have harmony.
Yeah, well, it's funny you mentioned harmony. So harmony is number 4 for me. It was actually kind of highlighted in our last episode that we just did on resolving conflict. So it's interesting that it's just sort of come up of, like, I'm going to change things up, and and that stirs up some conflict. But I think one of the things that I wanted to come back to is something, Jen, you just said, which I felt really powerful in terms of, I had mentioned individualization and consistency at the very beginning. And what I loved about what you were saying is that we need the equity to get to equality. So one of the things that I wrote down, I have individualization as number 9 and consistency at number 12. So they're not like, close cousins, sitting right next to each other, but they are in the same, vicinity. And I consider my dominance to go down pretty deep in my order. It's around 14, 15 is where the sort of separation line is between dominant and supporting. So these play pretty high for me. But I think it's interesting because they both desire that fairness, but with a personalized touch, which gets back to the way, Jen, you put it, I thought was just brilliant in terms of we need the individualization to get that equity, to provide equity in terms of what each person needs in terms of support, so that we can achieve the ideal, which is that we can eventually treat everybody with a sense of consistency, at least as Gallup defines it.
Right.
So I want to come back to that. In terms of other themes, the only other one I was going to really call out is my number one, which is learner, which is I've consistently tried to keep my learner open to understanding this topic more and more, and that's why I'm so thrilled that we've been able to engage with you, Susan, and have this awesome conversation. I want to transition us a little bit just to sort of the populations. We've talked a little bit about Jen's sort of helping the unseen and people that are not always advantaged in the same way that some of us in the Caucasian world are. But I'm curious, when you think about whether you bring in your research or the conversations you're having with Boulder Way Forward or whatever, as you think about new leaders, who get promoted, they transition from that individual contributor role. They're now put in positions of leading people for the first time. They are trying to create good, positive workplaces. I'm wondering if there are particular actions, and maybe you highlight, at least one or two that they can start with. I'm sure there's a laundry list. You said you've written books, plural, on this topic. But I'm wondering, are there some key actions that you would encourage a new manager to start off with, to start practicing some more equity so that we can move toward that world of equality?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. In any of our combinations of strength, the first thing, and this is something that I've had to work with in myself, but the most important thing with any of your strengths is to learn how to listen and to learn how to learn more, and not to be fear-based. So we have to look at the research, and I'm bringing in this point in time that we're at again, and keep ourselves in this rational space more than opinion throwing, right? And being strategic, and it's hard if that's not your natural thing, and that could be just down at the bottom a little bit, but we can push ourselves to be strategic and really think about that equity piece of treating everybody fairly. So maybe we don't use the word equity, maybe in our workplaces, fair. Be fair, treat each other well, and the way we want to be treated, the golden rule. And I would also say that I'm a big fan of the research behind StrengthsFinder, is that as managers use this and know your employees' themes, their natural talents, and we haven't, your folks know probably the difference between that. But when we know them, we can use them to lift each other, right? And then I guess lastly, to be maybe developers not in your top, but if we're a manager, we need to be a developer. If we have employees who are struggling with just throwing out opinions and so forth, we can help teach them. Let's look at the research. Let's have good great conversations. Be an amazing listener. Back to that. And then I wanted to just note that in terms of giving feedback, that's probably my last. Learn to give critical feedback, and just know that in everything I've talked about, there's gender differences. There really are. You just have to wrestle with those things. So listening is probably my first one, giving feedback, but also helping other people learn and grow and keep everybody in that. Let's look at research. Let's have good, informed conversations and treat each other with fairness and respect.
Excellent.
Those are fantastic points.
Yes.
Jen, did you want to add anything to that? I mean, that's a great starting point.
I mean, yeah, she kind of hit all the places I was thinking of as well, Susan. Those were fantastic, and I love your talk about being strategic. I will say it's number 34 for me. So while your achiever knows right where to go, my achiever is like, oh, where should we go? What can we do? And activators like, it doesn't matter, just do the thing.
Just go.
Just start.
Just do them. And then the responsibility is like, oh, but who needs it from us? Who needs us most? So I think there are ways that you can use lots of your talents to be strategic, even if you don't have strategic. And I loved that you brought in that developer sense of it. That was the one I think that I was going to go to the most is my way as the manager. My way might not be the best way, and it might not be the way for you. So encourage others to find their way. Like you can show them your way, but encourage them to find the way that works well for them. So I think that's a big one. We all are so different, even if our talents are similar, we can use them differently. And I think helping people find their way, it can be really powerful and encouraging, lifting all.
Your points. I'm actually going to bring two of yours together. I love the developer side, and then the helping people understand their own way. I also think there's a role for them to be advocates. I don't have a ton of influencing themes high, but when I was thinking about this topic of, how do we sort of individualize for the consistency, is how can you be an advocate and partner for those that have different backgrounds, particularly if it's different cultures or even male, we've talked a lot about the male-female dynamic. But so I think about like woo and bringing people on or include her and bring them into the circle or relate her and building those strong relationships, the listening and the learning, command, taking full charge for this is the way we're going to do things here. And we're going to make sure that everybody has the thing that they need. And maybe even significance, wanting to have a really important role in somebody's life in terms of helping them, sort of lift all boats. I really appreciate all your thoughts, Susan. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Yes, thank you.
I know we've kept you for a wonderful hour of conversation, and I know you're a very busy woman. So,
it's great to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
Yes, thank you, Susan.
Thank you. That was a fantastic conversation with Dr. Madsen. I hope our listeners got as much out of that as I did. I sensed that you had a ton of stuff to say there. So for our listeners, if you got as much out of this as we did, please come back again. And in the meantime, as always, I'm going to keep encouraging you to keep playing to your strengths.
And be uniquely you.
If you enjoyed this episode, we encourage you to like, follow, and subscribe wherever you find your podcasts.